When I got the call from my 8-year-old nephew at midnight, crying and asking why there was no food in the house, I never imagined it would expose a web of neglect that had been hiding in plain sight for months. What started as a simple wellness check would uncover family secrets that changed everything I thought I knew about my sister Jessica, and ultimately lead to a custody battle that would test every relationship in our family. This is the story of how protecting one vulnerable child revealed the true meaning of family responsibility. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Tuesday nights had become my sanctuary since Michael died. I'd pour myself a glass of wine, settle into his favorite chair with my laptop, and work on client designs until the world felt manageable again. The freelance graphic design business I'd built from our Beaverton home was thriving, and these quiet evening hours were when creativity flowed best. My phone was always on silent after 9 p.m., a boundary I'd established to protect my mental health during the hardest year of my life. But that particular Tuesday, something made me glance at my phone just before midnight. 7 missed calls from an unknown number. My heart lurched as I recognized the area code, Gresham, where my sister Jessica lived with her 8-year-old son, Ethan. The phone rang again as I stared at it. "Aunt Rachel?" The small voice on the other end was thick with tears and exhaustion. "Mom's not here, and I'm really hungry. There's nothing to eat, and I don't know what to do." I was already reaching for my keys before Ethan finished speaking. "Sweetie, where's your mom? When did she leave?" "She said she was going to get groceries this morning, but that was before school. I waited and waited after school, but she never came home. I found some crackers, but they're all gone now." My blood ran cold. It was nearly midnight, which meant Ethan had been alone for at least 12 hours, possibly longer. "I'm coming right now, okay? Can you check if the doors are locked?" The 20-minute drive to Gresham felt like hours. I called Jessica repeatedly, each call going straight to voicemail. Her tearful, outgoing message, recorded with Ethan giggling in the background, now felt like a mockery. "Hi, you've reached Jess. I'm probably showing an amazing house to amazing clients, so leave a message and I'll get back to you." Jessica's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The exterior looked normal enough, lawn mowed, newspaper still in the driveway from that morning. But as I approached the front door, details jumped out that I'd missed during previous visits. The porch light was burned out. Several windows had sheets instead of proper curtains. The mailbox was overflowing. Ethan opened the door before I could knock, launching himself into my arms with the desperation of a child who'd been holding it together for too long. He was still in his school clothes, a wrinkled polo shirt and jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His dark hair, so much like Jessica's, was tangled and unwashed. "I tried to call Mom, but her phone just makes that noise," he said, pressing his face against my shoulder. "I got scared when it got dark." I held him tight, my mind racing. "You did exactly the right thing calling me. Have you eaten anything today besides those crackers?" "I had lunch at school. They give me extra milk because I told him I forgot my lunch money again." The casual way he said "again" sent another chill through me. How often was this happening? The inside of the house told a story Jessica had been hiding. The living room looked lived in but neglected. Takeout containers on the couch top, laundry piled on the couch, a thin layer of dust on everything. But it was the kitchen that made my stomach drop. The refrigerator contained a carton of spoiled milk, some condiments, and leftover Chinese food that looked at least a week old. The pantry held a bag of stale bread, some peanut butter, and little else. "Ethan, when was the last time Mom went grocery shopping?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. He scrunched up his face, thinking, "I don't remember. Maybe when Trevor came over? That was before my birthday, I think." Trevor. Jessica's boyfriend of 6 months, a self-proclaimed social media influencer who specialized in luxury lifestyle content. I'd met him exactly once during Ethan's birthday party in September. He'd spent the entire time taking photos of himself with expensive items and left early for what he called a content opportunity. "And when did you last see Trevor?" I think. He and Mom were looking at pictures on his phone and talking about beaches. They seemed really excited." Ethan yawned, exhaustion finally catching up with his adrenaline. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through Jessica's Instagram, something I rarely did, but desperate times called for desperate measures.
Her most recent post from 18 hours ago showed her and Trevor on what appeared to be an airplane, champagne glasses raised, with the caption, "Finally, time for some much-needed R&R. Cabo, here we come." My hands shook as I read it again. Cabo, Mexico. They'd gone on vacation and left Ethan alone. Not with a babysitter, not with our parents, completely alone. The post had dozens of comments from friends saying, "Have fun and you deserve this." None of them apparently wondering where her 8-year-old son was. "Aunt Rachel, are you okay?" Ethan's voice brought me back to the moment. He was looking up at me with concern, this child who'd been abandoned, still worried about making the adults around him feel better. "I'm fine, sweetheart. You know what? How about we go to my house tonight? We can get you something good to eat, and you can sleep in the guest room. Tomorrow, we'll figure out everything." Relief flooded his face. "Can I bring my backpack and my inhaler? Mom always says I have to have my inhaler." The fact that Jessica had left knowing Ethan had asthma made the abandonment even more egregious. What if he'd had an attack with no adult around to help him? I helped him pack a small bag, noting that most of his clothes needed washing and his school supplies were scattered and disorganized. As we drove back to Beaverton, Ethan fell asleep in the passenger seat, his small body finally relaxing for the first time in hours. I kept glancing at him, marveling at his resilience, while fury built in my chest. How could Jessica do this? How could she just leave her child and go party in Mexico as if Ethan didn't exist? Back at my house, I got Ethan settled in the guest room, the room Michael and I had always planned to turn into a nursery someday. I made him a peanut butter sandwich and watched him eat like he hadn't seen food in days. Only after he'd brushed his teeth with a spare toothbrush and changed into one of my t-shirts that swallowed him whole did I allow myself the moment to consider what was going to happen next.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Toothbrush and crawled under the covers did I allow myself to process what had happened. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, staring at Jessica's Instagram again. Story after story showed their journey to the airport, their first-class seats, their arrival at what looked like an expensive resort. Trevor's account was even worse, a carefully curated showcase of luxury that made my stomach turn. Designer luggage, premium drinks, sunset views from what was clearly a high-end hotel room. Meanwhile, their 8-year-old son had been rationing crackers and trying not to cry alone in an empty house. I tried calling Jessica again, but international charges apparently weren't part of their vacation budget planning. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message that I hoped conveyed just a fraction of my anger. "Jessica, it's Rachel. I have Ethan. He called me at midnight because you left him alone with no food. Call me immediately when you get this. We need to talk." Sleep was impossible. I spent the night researching child abandonment laws in Oregon, looking up emergency custody procedures, and trying to understand how my sister, who I'd always seen as flighty but fundamentally good, could have done something so reckless and cruel. By morning, I had a plan. First, I'd get Ethan to school and try to maintain some normalcy for him. Second, I'd figure out how long Jessica and Trevor were planning to be gone. Third, I'd contact a lawyer because something told me this wasn't going to be resolved with a simple phone call and apology. But I also had questions that went deeper than this one incident. How long had Jessica been neglecting Ethan? How had I missed the signs? And most importantly, what was I prepared to do to protect my nephew from a mother who seemed to view him as an inconvenience rather than a responsibility? As I watched Ethan sleep peacefully for the first time in who knows how long, I realized that answering that last question might change my life forever. But looking at his small form curled up under blankets that finally provided real security, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. The morning would bring new challenges, but right now, Ethan was safe. And that was the only thing that mattered. The school's uncomfortable revelations. The next morning brought a deceptively normal routine that felt anything but normal. I woke Ethan gently at 7, noting how he startled awake as if expecting danger. Over breakfast,
real breakfast with eggs, toast, and fresh orange juice. He kept glancing at me like he was waiting for me to disappear too. "Aunt Rachel, how long can I stay here?" he asked between bites, his voice carefully neutral in the way children learn when they've been disappointed too many times. "As long as you need to, sweetheart. Don't worry about that right now." I kept my voice light, but internally, I was already calculating work deadlines I'd need to adjust and client meetings I'd have to reschedule. The drive to Riverside Elementary gave me my first real glimpse into Ethan's daily reality. He directed me through a route that was different than what my GPS suggested, and when I asked why, he explained that this way avoided the house where the mean dog lives that chases kids. The casual way he mentioned adapting to potential danger made my chest tight. At the school, I explained to the front office that I was Ethan's aunt and would be handling pickup and drop-off for the foreseeable future. The secretary, Mrs. Patterson, barely looked up from her computer. "Oh, good, someone reliable. We've been wondering about his situation." That phrase, "wondering about his situation," sent alarm bells ringing. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Patterson glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Well, it's just that Ethan's been having some challenges lately. Missing lunch money frequently, sometimes wearing the same clothes for days, and his mother hasn't responded to several requests for parent conferences. His teacher, Miss Williams, has been quite concerned." I felt heat rising in my cheeks, embarrassed that I hadn't known about any of this. "I'd like to speak with Miss Williams if possible. There have been some family circumstances that I'm trying to address." "Of course. She has a planning period at 10 if you'd like to come back then." I spent the 2 hours until 10 researching everything I could about Oregon's child welfare system and emergency custody procedures. The information was overwhelming and terrifying. Terms like child endangerment and neglect jumped out from legal websites, and I realized that what Jessica had done wasn't just irresponsible, it was potentially criminal. Miss Williams turned out to be a kind woman in her 30s who clearly cared deeply about her students. When I introduced myself and explained the current situation, her relief was palpable. "Thank goodness someone is finally stepping in," she said, settling into her desk chair. "I've been documenting concerns about Ethan for weeks now. Would you like to see what I've observed?" She pulled out a manila folder thick with notes and pulled copies of assignments. The picture that emerged was heartbreaking. Ethan had been falling asleep in class regularly. His homework was often incomplete or missing entirely. He'd been asking classmates to share their snacks almost daily. Most concerning, he'd written a creative writing assignment about being invisible that had alarmed Miss Williams enough to send a copy to the school counselor. "I've sent 3 letters home requesting a parent conference," Miss Williams continued. "The first 2 were returned to sender, and the third was never acknowledged. I was beginning to consider involving Child Protective Services, but I wanted to give the family one more chance." She showed me Ethan's essay, written in his careful 3rd-grade handwriting. "Sometimes I wish I was invisible so people wouldn't expect things from me. When you're invisible, no one gets mad if you can't find your lunch money or if your clothes are dirty. Being invisible would be easier than trying to be good enough all the time." Reading those words felt like being punched in the stomach. This wasn't a child acting out or being difficult. This was a child who had learned to expect neglect and was trying to manage it by making himself smaller, less noticeable, less of a burden. "Has Ethan mentioned his mother's boyfriend, Trevor?" I asked. Miss Williams consulted her notes. "He's mentioned someone taking pictures a lot and talking about money. He said this person told him that kids were expensive, and that's why some people don't have them." She looked up at me with obvious concern. That's not the kind of thing a child should be hearing from adults in his life. I thanked Miss Williams and assured her that I would be taking a very active role in Ethan's care moving forward. She gave me her direct phone number and asked me to keep her updated on any major changes in his living situation. Walking back to my car, I felt the weight of everything Ethan had been carrying alone. Not just the physical neglect of being left without food, but the emotional neglect of having his needs treated as inconveniences, his very existence seen as a burden by the adults who were supposed to protect him.
My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown international number. Finally, Jessica. Ratch, got your message. Everything's fine. Ethan's a big boy. Back Sunday night. Thanks for checking on him. I stared at the message in disbelief. No apology, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, no concern for her son's well-being. Just casual dismissal and an assumption that I would handle whatever inconvenience her abandonment had created. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on, Ethan was alone for over 12 hours with no food. This is not okay. We need to have a serious conversation when you return. Her response came quickly. Don't be so dramatic. He's fine. See you Sunday. That afternoon, I picked Ethan up from school and took him to our family pediatrician, Dr. Martinez. I wanted to make sure he was physically okay, but I also wanted professional documentation of his condition when he came into my care. Dr. Martinez had been our family doctor since Jessica and I were children, and she knew Ethan well. During the examination, she noted that he was underweight for his age and height, had several minor infections that suggested poor hygiene, and showed signs of chronic stress. When was his last checkup? She asked while reviewing his chart. I'm not sure. I'm hoping you can tell me. Dr. Martinez frowned at her computer screen. His last visit was 8 months ago for a required school physical. He's missed 2 scheduled follow-ups for his asthma management, and we've had to call several times about overdue vaccinations. She ran through a series of questions about his daily routine, diet, and living conditions. Ethan answered honestly, describing irregular meals, staying up late because there was no bedtime routine, and rationing his inhaler because he wasn't sure when he'd get a refill. Ethan, would you mind waiting in the play area while I talk to your aunt? Dr. Martinez asked gently. Once we were alone, her professional demeanor became more direct. Rachel, I'm going to be frank with you. This child shows multiple signs of neglect. The missed MACL appointments, the weight loss, the stress indicators, this isn't recent. This has been building for months. What should I do? Honestly, I think you should contact Child Protective Services. I know Jessica is your sister, but Ethan's welfare has to come first. I'm required to report suspected neglect, and what you've described certainly qualifies. The drive home was quiet. Ethan seemed exhausted from the day's appointments and revelations, and I was processing the growing realization that Jessica's abandonment wasn't an isolated incident, it was the culmination of months of increasing neglect. That evening, while Ethan did homework at my kitchen table, I called our parents. Linda and Robert Thompson lived in a retirement community in Bend, about 3 hours away. They'd always favored Jessica, excusing her irresponsible behavior as free-spirited and figuring things out. Oh, Rachel, I'm sure you're overreacting, Mom said when I explained the situation. Jessica works so hard, and that boyfriend seems very successful. They probably just needed a break. Mom, she left Ethan alone with no food for over 12 hours. He's 8 years old. Well, 8-year-olds are quite capable these days. You were babysitting at that age. I was babysitting other children for a few hours with adult supervision nearby, not abandoned completely. Dad got on the line, his voice already taking on the dismissive tone he used when he didn't want to deal with family drama. Rachel, honey, I think you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Jessica's a good mother. She's just young and still learning. She's 28, Dad. And still learning doesn't excuse child abandonment. Now you're being dramatic. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with my parents making excuse after excuse for Jessica's behavior. They refused to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation, instead treating it like a minor scheduling mishap that I was blowing out of proportion. After hanging up, I sat in my living room listening to Ethan's soft breathing through the baby monitor I'd set up in the guest room. My parents' reaction had been disappointing, but not surprising. Jessica had always been their favorite, the charming daughter who could do no wrong, while I was the responsible one who didn't need attention or worry. But this wasn't about family favoritism anymore. This was about a child's safety and well-being. And if my parents couldn't see that, then I'd have to protect Ethan without their support. I spent that night researching family law attorneys in Portland, reading reviews and checking credentials. By morning, I had a list of 3 lawyers who specialized in child custody cases. The first 2 were booked solid for weeks, but the third, David Walsh, could see me that afternoon. The legal reality check. David Walsh's office was located in a converted warehouse in Portland's Pearl District, all exposed brick and modern furniture that managed to feel both professional and approachable.
Walsh himself was younger than I'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with graying hair and the kind of direct manner that suggested he didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said after I'd given him the basic overview. I walked him through everything: the midnight call, the empty house, the Instagram posts from Mexico, my conversations with the school and doctor, even my parents' dismissive reaction. Walsh took notes throughout, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timelines and documentation. "Do you have any of this in writing?" he asked when I finished. I pulled out my folder of evidence: screenshots of Jessica's Instagram posts, the school's documentation of concerns, Dr. Martinez's notes from yesterday's appointment, and copies of the texts between Jessica and I. Walsh reviewed everything carefully, his expression growing more serious as he read. "This is actually quite strong documentation for such a short time frame. The social media posts with timestamps show clear premeditation rather than an emergency situation. What are my options?" "Several, depending on how far you're willing to go. The least invasive would be to document everything and have a serious conversation with your sister when she returns, possibly involving other family members or a mediator. But given what you've shown me, I don't think that's going to be sufficient." He leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "The nuclear option would be to file for emergency custody based on child abandonment. Given the evidence, you'd likely be granted temporary custody while the
Investigates. But you need to understand, once you go down that path, there's no taking it back. It will fundamentally change your relationship with your sister and potentially split your family. And if I don't, then you're gambling with a child's safety. Based on what you've told me, this isn't the first time Ethan has been neglected, and it won't be the last. The pattern is escalating, and next time, you might not be there to answer the phone. I thought about Ethan's essay, about being invisible, about his careful way of asking how long he could stay with me, about his relief at having real breakfast and a safe place to sleep. What would filing for emergency custody involve? Walsh pulled out a legal pad and began sketching out the process. First, we'd file a petition with the court detailing the abandonment and neglect. We'd include all your documentation as evidence. The court would likely grant temporary custody within 48 hours, especially given that the child is currently in your care and you can demonstrate his immediate needs are being met. Then what? Then your sister would be served with papers when she returns from vacation. She'd have the right to contest the custody arrangement, which would trigger a full investigation by Child Protective Services. They'd interview Ethan, inspect both living situations, review school and medical records, and make a recommendation to the court. The process sounded overwhelming, but also thorough. How long does that usually take? 3 to 6 months for a full resolution. In the meantime, you'd retain custody as long as you can provide a stable environment. The court's primary concern is always the best interests of the child. I asked about costs, logistics, and potential outcomes. Walsh was straightforward about everything. The legal fees would be substantial but manageable. The process would be emotionally difficult for everyone involved, and there was always some risk that a judge might decide in Jessica's favor if she could demonstrate meaningful change. But honestly, he added, based on what you've shown me, I think you have a very strong case. The abandonment is clear-cut, the pattern of neglect is well documented, and you've already proven you can provide appropriate care. I need to think about this. Of course, but don't think too long. If you're going to file, it's better to do it while the abandonment is recent and the evidence is fresh. Every day that passes without action could be seen as you accepting the situation as normal. I left Walsh's office with a packet of information and a decision deadline of Friday, 2 days before Jessica was scheduled to return. The weight of the choice ahead felt enormous. On one hand, filing for custody would protect Ethan from future neglect, but potentially destroy my relationship with Jessica and divide our family. On the other hand, doing nothing would leave Ethan vulnerable to escalating neglect from a mother who seemed increasingly unable or unwilling to prioritize his needs. That evening, I tried to maintain normalcy for Ethan's sake. We made dinner together. He was surprisingly helpful in the kitchen and seemed to enjoy having tasks and responsibilities. While we cooked, he chattered about school, his friends, and his favorite subjects, sounding more like a typical 8-year-old than the worried, careful child I'd rescued 3 days earlier. Aunt Rachel, he said while we were cleaning up, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. If Mom comes back and wants me to go home, do I have to go? The question hit me like a physical blow. This child, barely 8 years old, was already thinking about his own safety and autonomy in ways no child should have to think. Why do you ask? He was quiet for a moment, carefully drying a plate. Sometimes I think Mom forgets about me. Not mean forgetting, just busy forgetting. And when she remembers, she gets stressed because there's all this stuff she was supposed to do for me. But when I'm here with you, it feels like you're happy I'm here. I knelt down to his eye level. Ethan, I want you to know that any adult who gets stressed about taking care of you isn't handling their responsibility properly. Taking care of you should never feel like a burden, and you should never have to worry about whether the adults in your life want you around. So I don't have to go back if I don't want to? It was a question I couldn't answer definitively without legal action, but I couldn't bring myself to tell this child that his preferences might not matter in the face of parental rights. I'm going to make sure you're safe and cared for no matter what. That's a promise. He hugged me then, fierce and tight, and I felt the weight of that promise settle into my bones. Whatever it took, legal battles, family drama, financial strain, I would not let this child be abandoned again. That night, after Ethan was asleep, I called Michael's voicemail. I'd kept his phone active after the accident, unable to bring myself to cancel the service, and sometimes I still called just to hear his voice on the greeting. Tonight, I needed his wisdom, his steady presence, his way of cutting through emotional complexity to find the right path. Hey, it's me, I said after the beep. I know this is crazy, but I need your advice. There's this little boy who needs someone to fight for him, and I'm scared I'm not strong enough to be that person. But I keep thinking about how you always said that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day to put someone else's well-being ahead of your own comfort. I paused, listening to the silence on the other end, imagining what Michael would say if he could respond. I think I know what you'd tell me. You'd say that some choices are scary because they're important, and the fact that I'm scared means I understand what's at stake. You'd probably also say something about how we don't always get to choose our battles, but when a battle chooses us, we have a responsibility to fight it well. By Thursday morning, I'd made my decision. I called David Walsh and scheduled an appointment that afternoon to begin the emergency custody filing. I also called Dr. Martinez and asked her to prepare a formal report documenting Ethan's condition and medical history. Then I called Miss Williams and asked if she could provide written documentation of the school's concerns. The hardest call was to my supervisor at the graphic design firm where I subcontracted. I explained that I was dealing with a family emergency that would require significant schedule adjustments for the foreseeable future. Fortunately, most of my work could be done remotely and on flexible deadlines, but I wanted to be transparent about my situation. Take whatever time you need, she said. Family comes first. Always. If only my actual family felt the same. The point of no return. Friday afternoon found me back in David Walsh's office, this time with a thick folder of documentation and a determination that surprised me with its intensity. Over the past 4 days, I'd watched Ethan gradually shed some of his worried reservedness, and as the real Ethan emerged, my determination grew stronger.
Ethan gradually relaxed into a routine of safety and care. He'd started sleeping through the night without nightmares. He'd gained confidence in asking for things he needed. Most tellingly, he'd stopped apologizing for existing. I want to file for emergency custody, I told Walsh without preamble. He nodded, already pulling out the necessary forms. I've prepared the initial petition based on our previous conversation. Let's review the key points and make sure we have everything documented properly. The legal language was stark and clinical, reducing Ethan's suffering to numbered paragraphs and evidentiary exhibits, but it was also powerful in its clarity. There was no way to read the petition and not understand that a child had been endangered by parental neglect. Walsh walked me through each section, explaining how the evidence supported our claims and what the court would be looking for in their initial review.
The social media posts showing Jessica's vacation while Ethan was abandoned would be particularly compelling, as would Dr. Martinez's medical report documenting chronic neglect. "One thing I want to prepare you for," Walsh said as we finalized the paperwork, "your sister will likely be very angry when she's served with these papers. People often respond to legal action with hostility, even when they know they're in the wrong. She may try to turn other family members against you or make promises about changing that she has no intention of keeping. I've already seen how my parents respond to concerns about Jessica. They'll probably blame me for being dramatic. That's unfortunately common in these situations. Family loyalty often trumps child welfare, even when the evidence is clear. The important thing is to stay focused on Ethan's needs and not get drawn into family drama." We filed the petition that afternoon, and Walsh assured me that I should have a response from the court by Monday morning. In the meantime, Ethan would continue staying with me, and I should document everything: his daily routine, any statements he made about his home life, any changes in his behavior or well-being. That evening was surreal. Ethan and I made pizza from scratch, laughing as we tried to toss the dough like they do in movies and ending up with more flour on ourselves than in the bowl. He helped me with some simple graphic design work, fascinated by the computer programs I used, and surprisingly good at color selection and layout critique. "You're really good at this," I told him as he suggested moving a text element to create better balance in a logo design. "I like making things look right," he said seriously. "When things are messy or wrong, it makes my stomach feel funny. But when everything fits together nice, it's better." I wondered how much of that preference for order and harmony came from living in chaos with Jessica. Children who grow up in unpredictable environments often become hyper-vigilant about creating control and stability wherever they can find it. Saturday passed quietly. We went to the farmer's market, where Ethan marveled at the abundance of fresh food and asked thoughtful questions about where different vegetables came from. We visited the library, where he checked out 6 books and spent an hour in the children's section just enjoying the quiet space filled with stories. "Mom doesn't like libraries," he mentioned as we walked home with his stack of books. "They say they're boring and smell weird." "What do you think?" "I think they smell like adventures waiting to happen." That afternoon, while Ethan was absorbed in one of his new books, I tried one last time to reach Jessica directly. Her phone went to voicemail, so I left a message that I hoped would penetrate her vacation haze. "Jessica, it's Rachel. I know you think I'm overreacting, but I need you to understand how serious this situation is. Ethan was abandoned and neglected, and I have documentation from his school and doctor confirming ongoing concerns about his welfare. When you get back, we need to have an honest conversation about what's best for him. Please call me before you come to pick him up." She didn't call back. Sunday evening arrived with an ominous wait. Jessica and Trevor were scheduled to return that night, and I knew our confrontation was inevitable. I'd prepared Ethan as gently as possible, explaining that his mom would want to see him when she got back from her trip, but that some grown-up conversations needed to happen first. "Will I have to go back to the empty house?" he asked, unconsciously echoing the phrase I'd started using in my own mind. "Not tonight. We're going to make sure any place you live has everything you need: food, safety, and adults who are happy to take care of you." At 9:30 p.m., headlights swept across my living room windows. A car door slammed, followed by the click of high heels on my front walkway. I looked out to see Jessica striding toward my door, designer luggage in tow, and an expression that promised conflict. I opened the door before she could knock, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind me to keep our conversation away from Ethan's ears. "Where is my son?" Jessica demanded without preamble. Her vacation tan couldn't hide the anger in her eyes. "He's safe inside. We need to talk first." "There's nothing to talk about. You had no right to take him from his home. I want him back now." "Jessica, you left an 8-year-old child alone with no food for over 12 hours. That's not a difference of opinion. That's child endangerment." She waved dismissively, the same gesture I'd seen her use when anyone criticized her choices. "He's fine. You're being ridiculously dramatic, just like always. Ethan's a smart kid. He can handle being alone for a few hours." "It wasn't a few hours. It was over 12 hours, and he had no way to contact you. He was scared and hungry and alone." Every parent needs breaks. Just because you never had kids doesn't mean you understand what it's like. The comment about never having kids
was a deliberate low blow designed to undermine my credibility and hurt me personally. But instead of the pain I might have felt a week ago, I felt a surge of protective anger. This isn't about taking breaks. This is about basic responsibility. Did you even arrange for anyone to check on him? Did you leave emergency contact information? Did you make sure he had food? He knows how to use the phone. He could have called someone if there was a real emergency. He did call someone. He called me at midnight, crying because he was hungry and scared. That should have never been necessary. Jessica's expression shifted slightly, the first crack in her defensive armor. Look, maybe it wasn't ideal, but everything worked out fine. You were there, he's okay, and now we can all move on. No, Jessica, we can't just move on. This isn't an isolated incident. Ethan's teacher says you've missed multiple parent conferences. His doctor says he's missed
Appointments. He's been going to school without lunch money regularly. This is a pattern of neglect. I work hard to provide for him. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to balance everything as a single mother? Then get help. Ask family for support. Hire a babysitter. Don't just abandon your child and hope for the best. We stared at each other in the porch light. Years of accumulated frustration and different values finally coming to the surface. Jessica had always been the one who wanted freedom without responsibility, while I'd been the one who understood that some choices came with permanent obligations. I want to see Ethan now, she said, her voice taking on a legal tone that suggested someone had coached her. He's asleep. You can see him tomorrow, after we've talked about how to move forward. You can't keep me from my son. I'm not keeping you from him. I'm making sure his needs are prioritized in any plan we make. Jessica's phone buzzed, and she glanced at opportunity, so I need to get Ethan and go. The casual mention of another business opportunity while discussing her son's welfare was the final straw. This wasn't a mother who had made a mistake and was ready to do better. This was someone who still saw Ethan as a logistical problem to be managed around her preferred lifestyle. Jessica, I filed for emergency custody on Friday. The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. Jessica's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, rage. You did what? I filed for emergency custody. You'll be served with papers tomorrow. The court will review the evidence of abandonment and neglect, and they'll decide what's in Ethan's best interests. You had no right. He's my son. And you abandoned him. Being a biological parent doesn't give you the right to endanger your child. Jessica was screeching now, her vacation composure completely shattered. This is insane. You can't just steal someone's child because you disagree with their parenting. This isn't about disagreeing with your parenting. This is about the fact that your parenting endangered a child's safety and well-being. She pulled out her phone, presumably to call someone for advice or support. My lawyers are going to destroy you in court. You're just a bitter woman who couldn't have kids of her own, so you're trying to steal mine. The accusation stung, but it also revealed Jessica's fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. This wasn't about my desire to be a mother. It was about Ethan's need for responsible care. This isn't about what I want, Jessica. It's about what Ethan needs. And what he needs is stability, safety, and adults who prioritize his well-being. He has that with me. Really? When was the last time you took him to the doctor? When was the last time you attended a parent conference? When was the last time you made sure he had lunch money for school? Jessica couldn't answer those questions, and we both knew it. She stood there in her designer vacation clothes, fresh from a luxury resort, unable to provide basic details about her son's daily needs. I'll fight this, she said finally. I'll prove you're an unfit guardian and get Ethan back. Then prove you're a fit mother first. Show the court that you can provide consistent care, that you can put Ethan's needs ahead of your social life, that you can be the parent he deserves. Jessica turned and stalked back to the car where Trevor was waiting.
I watched them drive away, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. But I also knew that whatever happened next, Ethan was safe tonight. And for now, that was enough. The evidence mounts. Monday morning arrived with an official envelope slipped under my door at 6 a.m. The court had approved my emergency custody petition with startling speed. Judge Patricia Monroe had reviewed the evidence and granted temporary custody pending a full hearing scheduled for 3 weeks out. Reading the legal language that officially recognized me as Ethan's temporary guardian felt surreal and overwhelming. Ethan was already awake when I checked on him, sitting up in bed with one of his library books. The resilience of children never ceased to amaze me. Here was a child whose world had been turned upside down multiple times in the past week, yet he was calmly reading about dragons and adventures. "Morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep?" "Good. I dreamed about the farmer's market. We were buying ingredients for a cake." He looked up from his book with curious eyes. "Aunt Rachel, why was Mom so upset last night? I heard her voice outside." I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. "Your mom and I disagree about some things, and sometimes adults have to work through disagreements in ways that might seem scary, but are actually about keeping everyone safe." "Am I safe here?" "Yes, you are absolutely safe here. A judge looked at all the information about your situation and decided that you should stay with me while the grown-ups figure some things out." "Can I still go to school?" "Of course! We're going to keep everything as normal as possible for you."
Explained. There have been several large withdrawals over the past 6 months, including a significant cash advance on Friday that we wanted to verify with you. I didn't share any accounts with Jessica and told the representative as much. After some investigation, we discovered that Jessica had somehow gained access to the small savings account our grandfather had left us jointly, which I'd forgotten existed. Over the past 6 months, she'd withdrawn nearly $8,000 from an account that was supposed to be untouched except for emergencies. The most recent withdrawal was $1,200 on Friday afternoon, the representative continued. The transaction was processed at a bank branch near Portland International Airport. My blood went cold. Jessica had withdrawn money for her vacation on the same day I'd filed for custody. She'd funded her trip to Mexico with money that was partially mine while leaving her son abandoned and unfed. David Walsh was fascinated by this development when I called to inform him. Financial irresponsibility, especially when it involves joint assets, can be very compelling evidence in custody cases. It demonstrates poor judgment and prioritization of personal desires over family obligations. That evening, while helping Ethan with his homework, I broached a difficult subject. "Ethan, you know how sometimes adults have to answer questions about important things? A nice lady named Miss Blake is going to come talk to you later this week. She just wants to make sure you're happy and safe." "Is she going to ask about Mom?" "She might. If she does, I want you to know that you should always tell the truth, even if you think it might hurt someone's feelings. The truth is the only way adults can make good decisions about taking care of kids." Ethan considered this seriously. What if the truth makes Mom sad? Sometimes the truth does make people sad, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't tell it. Your job is just to be honest about what happened and how you felt. The adults will figure out what to do with that information. Tuesday brought an unexpected visitor. I was working in my home office while Ethan was at school when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a woman in professional attire carrying a briefcase and looking somewhat uncomfortable. "Miss Thompson? I'm Sandra Martinez, attorney for Jessica Miller. May I come in?" I invited her in but remained cautious. Sandra Martinez was everything I'd expected from an expensive family law attorney, impeccably dressed, carefully composed, and radiating the kind of confidence that comes from winning cases other people couldn't afford to fight. "I understand you filed for custody of my client's son," she began without preamble. "I'm here to see if we can resolve this matter without the trauma of a prolonged court battle." "I'm listening." My client acknowledges that perhaps her vacation timing was not ideal, but she's prepared to make certain concessions to demonstrate her commitment to Ethan's welfare. She's willing to agree to supervised visitation, parenting classes, and regular check-ins with a court-appointed monitor. The offer sounded reasonable on the surface, but I'd learned enough about family law to recognize a strategic retreat when I heard one. What does she want in return? Full custody restored within 6 months, assuming she complies with all court requirements. Essentially, you'd be providing temporary care while she demonstrates fitness. I shook my head. Miss Martinez, your client didn't just make a poor scheduling choice. She abandoned her child with no food, no supervision, and no way to contact her. Before that, she'd been neglecting his medical care, missing school conferences, and failing to provide basic necessities. This isn't about timing, it's about a pattern of prioritizing her own desires over her child's welfare. Everyone makes mistakes, Miss Thompson. The question is whether we're going to destroy a family over those mistakes or work together to rebuild it. I'm not destroying anything. I'm protecting a child who was left vulnerable by adult choices. Sandra's professional facade cracked slightly, revealing the tactical calculation underneath. You should know that my client intends to challenge your fitness as a guardian. She's prepared to argue that your grief over your husband's death has made you unstable and that you're using Ethan to fill an emotional void. The threat was delivered with clinical precision, designed to rattle me and make me doubt my motivations. But instead of the intended effect, it only strengthened my resolve. Your client is welcome to make whatever arguments she thinks will help her case. The evidence will speak for itself. After Sandra left, I called David Walsh to report the conversation. He was unsurprised by Jessica's strategy, but pleased by my response. Attacking your mental health is a common tactic when the facts aren't favorable, he explained. The good news is that you have an extensive support network, professional stability, and clear documentation of appropriate care for Ethan. Her arguments will ring hollow against the evidence of actual neglect. Wednesday afternoon brought Jennifer Blake from Child Protective Services. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her 30s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I want to start by saying that your quick action likely prevented a much worse situation. Too often, we don't get involved until after serious harm has occurred. She spent 2 hours going through every aspect of Ethan's care, from his daily routine, to his medical needs, to his emotional well-being. She inspected his room, reviewed the food in my pantry, and asked detailed questions about my work schedule and childcare arrangements. Tell me about your relationship with Ethan before this incident. I've always been his aunt, but I wasn't as involved in his daily life as I wish I had been. Jessica and I aren't particularly close, and I think I assumed that no news was good news regarding Ethan's care. Do you feel equipped to handle full-time guardianship of an 8-year-old? It was a fair question that I'd been asking myself repeatedly. Honestly, I'm learning as I go, but I'm committed to putting his needs first, which seems to be more than his mother was willing to do. When Ethan came home from school, Jennifer spoke with him privately for about 30 minutes. I could hear their conversation through the thin walls, her gentle questions about his living situations, his feelings about his mother, his school experience, and his relationship with me. Ethan is remarkably articulate for his age, Jennifer told me after their conversation. He's also clearly been parentified to some degree, taking on emotional and practical responsibilities that aren't appropriate for a child his age. What does that mean for the case?
Concerns about neglect. Children who have been adequately cared for don't typically develop that level of hypervigilance about adult emotional states. Thursday brought Jessica's first official response to the custody filing. David Walsh called me at work with an update that was both expected and infuriating. She's demanding immediate return of Ethan and claiming that you coerced him into making false statements about his home life. She's also alleging that you're financially motivated because of life insurance money from your husband's death. That's completely false. Michael's life insurance went toward paying off our mortgage and his medical bills. I know, and we can easily disprove that claim. But it tells us something about her strategy. She's going to attack your character and motivations rather than address the evidence of neglect. That afternoon, I received a series of increasingly hostile text messages from Jessica. They started with accusations about poisoning Ethan against her and escalated to threats about exposing my mental instability in court.
I forwarded everything to David Walsh, who advised me to stop responding entirely. "Let her dig her own grave," he said. "Every hostile communication makes her look worse to the court." The weekend brought a breakthrough in an unexpected form. While helping Ethan organize his school papers, I found a journal assignment from several weeks earlier that his teacher had apparently never seen. The prompt was, "Write about a time when you felt scared," and Ethan's response was heartbreaking in its matter-of-fact tone. "Last month, when Mom went out with Trevor and didn't come home for 2 days. I ate peanut butter for dinner both nights and went to bed when it got dark because I didn't know how to turn on the big TV. I was scared something bad happened to them, but also scared they would be mad if I called someone. I kept checking the locks on the doors like Mom taught me, but I wished someone bigger was there too." The entry was dated 3 weeks before Jessica's vacation, proving that abandoning Ethan wasn't an isolated incident, but part of an established pattern. I immediately photographed the journal entry and sent it to David Walsh, who called it devastating evidence of ongoing neglect. Sunday evening brought an unexpected phone call from my mother. Her voice was strained and formal, lacking the usual warmth of our conversations. "Rachel, your father and I have been talking, and we think you need to reconsider this custody situation. Jessica came to see us yesterday, and she's genuinely remorseful about what happened." "Mom, did she tell you that she's been leaving Ethan alone regularly? Did she mention that he's been going to school without lunch money or missing medical appointments?" "She explained that she's been going through a difficult time and made some poor choices, but taking away her son isn't the answer. She needs support, not punishment." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with my parents making increasingly desperate appeals for family unity and Jessica's redemption. They seemed genuinely unable to grasp the difference between making mistakes and endangering a child. "If you don't drop this custody case, you're going to tear this family apart," my father warned. "Dad, Jessica tore this family apart when she abandoned her child. I'm just trying to put the pieces back together in a way that protects Ethan." After hanging up, I sat in my quiet house listening to Ethan's steady breathing through the baby monitor. My parents' reaction hurt, but it also clarified something important. Their loyalty to Jessica was so absolute that they couldn't see past it to Ethan's actual needs. That night, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible a week earlier. I called David Walsh and asked him to add a provision to our custody petition requesting that any visitation between Jessica and Ethan be supervised, not just by court officials, but also with restricted access from my parents until they could demonstrate understanding of the safety concerns involved. "Are you sure about that?" Walsh asked. "It's a significant escalation that will likely create permanent family divisions." My parents just spent an hour trying to convince me to return a child to an unsafe situation because it would be more convenient for everyone. That tells me they can't be trusted to prioritize Ethan's welfare over family harmony. Monday morning brought news that Jessica had filed her own motion requesting immediate custody return and claiming that I was an unfit guardian due to emotional instability and obsessive behavior. Her filing included statements from Trevor about my aggressive confrontation and sworn affidavits from my parents questioning my judgment and mental state. Reading my own family's words being used against me in a legal document was devastating in a way I hadn't expected. But it also confirmed that I was fighting this battle alone, which somehow made my resolve stronger rather than weaker. The investigation deepens. The call came at 7 a.m. on Tuesday, waking me from the first deep sleep I'd managed in days. Jennifer Blake's voice was crisp and professional, but I detected an underlying urgency that immediately put me on alert. "Ms. Thompson, I need to inform you that I visited Ms. Miller's residence yesterday evening as part of my investigation. There are some significant concerns I need to discuss with you and your attorney." My heart rate spiked. "What kind of concerns?" "I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you meet me at my office this afternoon? Please bring Mr. Walsh if possible." The morning dragged impossibly slowly. I dropped Ethan at school, trying to maintain normal conversation while my mind raced through possibilities. When I picked him up that afternoon, Ms. Williams pulled me aside with her own concerns.
Ethan mentioned that his mom came to the school yesterday asking questions about who he'd been talking to and what he'd been saying. She didn't have permission to be here during school hours, and her behavior made our security guard uncomfortable. Another piece of evidence for our growing file. Jessica was clearly feeling desperate enough to take increasingly risky actions. David Walsh met me at the CPS office, a sterile government building that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. Jennifer Blake led us into a small conference room where she'd spread out photographs and documents that made my stomach turn. "I want to prepare you for what I'm about to show you," she began. "Ms. Miller's living situation is significantly worse than we initially understood. The photographs revealed the true state of Jessica's house, not just the superficial neglect I'd observed during my emergency visit, but systematic deterioration that spoke to months of dysfunction. Dirty dishes were piled everywhere, mold was growing in the bathroom, and children's clothing was scattered
Throughout the house, unwashed and abandoned. But this isn't the most concerning discovery, Jennifer continued, pulling out another set of photos. I found evidence of drug use in the master bedroom. The images showed a small bag of white powder, rolled bills, and a mirror with residue, the unmistakable signs of cocaine use. My hands shook as I processed what this meant for Ethan's safety. Miss Miller wasn't present during my visit, but Mr. Manning was there and claimed the drugs belonged to a friend who had visited recently. However, the placement and condition of the materials suggest regular use rather than a one-time occurrence. David Walsh leaned forward, his expression grim. Was Trevor arrested? He wasn't in possession at the time of my visit, and without Miss Miller present, I couldn't make any immediate arrests. However, I filed a report with local police, and they're opening their own investigation. The revelation that Jessica had been using drugs while caring for Ethan, or more accurately, while failing to care for him, cast everything in an even darker light. It explained the escalating neglect, the poor decision-making, and the increasing absences from Ethan's life. "What does this mean for our case?" I asked. "It strengthens your position significantly," Jennifer replied. "Drug use, especially in a home with a minor child, is taken very seriously by family courts. Combined with the documented abandonment and neglect, this creates a compelling case for permanent custody change." That evening, I faced the difficult task of having an age-appropriate conversation with Ethan about staying safe around adults who might not be making good choices. I didn't mention drugs specifically, but I talked about how sometimes grown-ups do things that affect their judgment and ability to keep children safe. "Is that why Mom seems different sometimes?" he asked with a perceptiveness that continued to amaze me. "What do you mean by different?" "Sometimes she's really happy and talks really fast and wants to do lots of things. But then other times she's sleepy during the day and gets mad about little things. Trevor's like that too." My heart broke for this child who had been observing and trying to navigate adult dysfunction without any framework for understanding what he was seeing. No 8-year-old should have to develop survival strategies around parental drug use. Wednesday brought another legal development when David Walsh called with news about Jessica's response to the drug discovery. She's claiming the substances were Trevor's and that she was unaware of any drug use in her home. She's also stating that she's ended her relationship with him and is committed to making whatever changes necessary to regain custody. Do you believe her? It doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is what she can prove. If she wants the court to believe she's made meaningful changes, she'll need to demonstrate consistent sobriety, stable housing, and reliable employment over an extended period. The next few days brought a parade of Jessica's attempts to rehabilitate her image. She enrolled in parenting classes, signed up for a substance abuse evaluation, and started posting social media content about the importance of family and motherhood. The sudden transformation felt performative rather than genuine, but I knew it might be compelling to people who wanted to believe in redemption stories. My parents called again, this time with renewed pressure based on Jessica's apparent rehabilitation efforts. "She's really trying to change, Rachel," my mother pleaded. "She's taken responsibility for her mistakes and she's getting help. Doesn't that count for something?" "Mom, taking a few classes after getting caught isn't the same as genuine change.
Where was this commitment to improvement when Ethan was going to school hungry or sleeping alone in an empty house? People can change, especially when they realize what they stand to lose. That's exactly the problem. She's changing because she got caught, not because she recognized that her choices were harming Ethan. What happens when the legal pressure goes away and the novelty of parenting classes wears off? Friday brought the most significant development yet. Jennifer Blake called with news that would reshape the entire case. We've received some information from an unexpected source. Trevor Manning contacted our office this morning wanting to provide a statement about conditions in Miss Miller's home. Apparently, Trevor had decided that his relationship with Jessica wasn't worth legal jeopardy. He was prepared to testify about her drug use, the frequent abandonment of Ethan, and financial irresponsibility that had left the household without basic necessities. He also mentioned something about Miss Miller's family providing money to fund their vacation, money that was supposed to be used for household expenses, including food for Ethan. The revelation about family money added another layer of betrayal. Not only had Jessica used our joint inheritance to fund her vacation, but she'd also apparently received additional money from our parents that was intended for Ethan's care. Is Trevor's testimony credible? I asked. He has text messages, photographs, and detailed knowledge of their living situation that corroborates our other evidence. While his motivations for coming forward are clearly self-serving, the information he's providing appears accurate. That weekend, I tried to maintain normalcy for Ethan while processing the rapidly evolving legal situation. We went to the park, visited the library, and worked on a school science project together. His contentment and growing confidence were visible daily. Better posture, more spontaneous laughter, less constant vigilance about adult moods and reactions. "Aunt Rachel," he said while we were building a volcano for his science project, "do you think Mom will be okay?" It was a question that showed both his emotional maturity and his fundamental kindness. Despite everything he had experienced, he was still concerned about his mother's well-being. "I think your mom has some things she needs to figure out, and sometimes adults need help figuring out how to be their best selves. The most important thing is making sure that you're safe and cared for while she works on those things." "Will I ever live with her again?" "I don't know, sweetheart. That will depend on a lot of things. But no matter what happens, you'll always have people who love you and want to keep you safe." Sunday evening brought a call from David Walsh with news about our court date. Judge Monroe has moved up our hearing to next Friday. Apparently, the drug evidence and Trower's cooperation have convinced her that this case needs immediate resolution rather than a prolonged investigation. Is that good news or bad news? It's good news for us. Quick resolution usually favors the part
Stronger evidence, and Jessica won't have time to establish a pattern of sustained change. However, it also means we need to be completely prepared with all our documentation and witness testimony. That night, after Ethan was asleep, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine and a thick folder containing 3 weeks' worth of evidence about my nephew's care and my sister's failures. The legal documents, medical reports, school records, and photographs told a story that was both deeply personal and universally recognizable. A child caught between adult dysfunction and adult protection. Tomorrow would bring another week of preparation for a court hearing that would determine Ethan's future. But tonight, I could hear his peaceful breathing through the baby monitor and know that whatever challenges lay ahead, this child was safe, fed, and loved. Sometimes that knowledge was enough to quiet all the other uncertainties. The family schism Monday morning brought an unexpected visitor who would change the trajectory of everything. I was reviewing case documents at my kitchen table while Ethan was at school when the doorbell rang insistently. Through the window, I could see my father standing on the porch with an expression I'd rarely seen, desperate and determined. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I asked as I opened the door. "We need to talk, Rachel. Really talk. Without your mother getting emotional or Jessica spinning stories. Just you and me." I invited him in, noting how he seemed to have aged years in the past few weeks. His usually confident bearing was replaced by something more uncertain, more vulnerable.
I went to see Jessica's house myself yesterday, he said without preamble, settling heavily into my living room chair. Your mother didn't want me to go, said it would just upset me. But I needed to see for myself what you were talking about. My heart rate picked up. My father was many things, stubborn, protective of Jessica, sometimes willfully blind to problems, but he wasn't dishonest. If he'd gone to investigate independently, it meant my words had created doubt in his certainty about Jessica's fitness. What did you find? His face crumpled slightly. It's bad, Rachel. Worse than I wanted to believe. The house smells like something died in there. There's mold in the bathroom that looks like it's been growing for months. Ethan's bedroom? He paused, composing himself. Ethan's bedroom has a mattress on the floor with sheets that are gray with dirt. No books, no toys, just a pile of clothes that look like they haven't been washed in weeks. I waited, knowing there was more. I found needles, Rachel, in Jessica's bedroom, behind her dresser. Not the kind for medicine, the kind people use for drugs. My blood went cold. CPS had found evidence of cocaine use, but needles suggested something much more serious. Did you call the police? I called Jennifer Blake first. She's meeting police there this afternoon for another search. He looked up at me with eyes full of pain and regret. How did I miss this? How did I convince myself that everything was fine when my grandson was living in those conditions? Dad, you wanted to believe the best about Jessica. That's not a character flaw, it's what parents do. But that put Ethan at risk. All those times your mother and I told you to stop being so dramatic, stop interfering, we were enabling Jessica to keep neglecting him. The admission cost him something significant. My father had built his identity around being the patriarch who kept the family together and made wise decisions. Acknowledging that his protection of Jessica had harmed Ethan challenged everything he believed about his role as a grandfather and father. What changed your mind about going to see the house? Ethan's school called us Friday. Apparently, Jessica showed up again trying to get information about who he'd been talking to and what he'd said about his home life. The principal called it concerning enough to notify all of Ethan's emergency contacts. I felt a surge of anger that Jessica was still trying to manipulate and control the narrative, even to the point of involving the school inappropriately. The principal mentioned that Ethan's grades and behavior had improved dramatically since staying with you. She said he seemed more alert, less anxious, and had started participating in class discussions for the first time all year. Dad's voice grew thick with emotion. That's when I realized that I'd been so focused on protecting Jessica that I'd completely ignored what was best for Ethan. We sat in silence for a moment, processing the weight of the situation and the family dynamics that had allowed it to escalate. Your mother is having a much harder time accepting this. She's convinced that if we just get Jessica into the right program, give her another chance, everything will work out fine. What do you think? I think Ethan deserves better than being an experiment in whether his mother can get her life together. He's 8 years old, Rachel. He shouldn't have to wait around hoping the adults in his life will figure out how to take care of him. The conversation represented a fundamental shift in family alliances that I'd never expected. My father, who had spent my entire childhood favoring Jessica and minimizing my concerns, was finally seeing the situation clearly. I want to testify at the custody hearing, he said firmly. I want to tell the judge what I saw in that house and support your petition for permanent custody. Dad, that will destroy your relationship with Jessica and probably with Mom. My relationship with Jessica has been built on enabling her irresponsible behavior. Maybe it's time that changed. He stood up, looking more resolute than I'd seen him in years. I failed as a grandfather by protecting the wrong person. I won't make that mistake again. After he left, I called David Walsh to inform him about this unexpected development. Having my father's testimony would be powerful, but it would also escalate the family conflict to a level that might never be repairable. Family testimony is always complicated, but if he's genuinely prepared to describe the conditions he observed, it could be decisive evidence.
That afternoon brought news that the police search of Jessica's house had yielded results that made everything more serious. Jennifer Blake called with an update that left me shaken. We found heroin paraphernalia and enough evidence of drug trafficking to warrant serious criminal charges. This isn't just personal use. There's evidence she was selling drugs from the home where Ethan was living. The revelation that my nephew had been living in what was essentially a drug house made my stomach churn. Every night he'd spent in that environment, every day he'd been exposed to the people and dangers associated with drug dealing was another layer of endangerment I hadn't fully grasped. Is Jessica under arrest?
Manning. They're both being held pending arraignment on multiple felony charges. The speed with which everything was unraveling was dizzying. What had started as a custody dispute over child abandonment had escalated into a criminal case involving drug trafficking. The implications for Ethan's safety were clear, but the impact on our family would be devastating. I had to figure out how to explain to an 8-year-old that his mother was in jail without traumatizing him further or making him feel responsible for adult consequences. When I picked Ethan up from school that afternoon, Miss Williams pulled me aside with additional concerns. 2 police officers came by earlier asking questions about Ethan's home life and whether we'd observed any signs of drug activity. I told them about his frequent hunger, poor hygiene, and references to lots of different people coming and going from his house. The fact that Ethan had mentioned strangers coming and going was another piece of evidence that he'd been exposed to drug trafficking activity. No child should have to normalize that level of danger in their home environment. "How much does Ethan understand about what's happening?" Miss Williams asked. "I'm not sure. He knows his mom made some bad choices and that he's staying with me while adults figure things out. I haven't told him about the arrest yet. He's been asking other children if their parents ever go away for a long time. It suggests he's processing the possibility that this separation might not be temporary." That evening, I sat Ethan down for the most difficult conversation of my life. I explained in age-appropriate terms that his mother had been making choices that weren't safe for herself or for him, and that other adults needed to help her learn how to make better choices. "Is Mom in trouble?" he asked, with the careful tone of a child who had learned to gauge adult emotional states. "Yes, she's in trouble, but the kind of trouble that adults can work through if they're willing to get help and make changes." "Is she coming home soon?" "No, sweetheart. She's going to be away for a while, probably a long while, getting help with her problems." Ethan was quiet for several minutes, processing this information with a maturity that broke my heart. "Are you going to send me away when she gets better?" "Ethan, listen to me very carefully. You are not going anywhere unless it's somewhere you want to go and somewhere I know you'll be safe and loved. That's a promise I'm making to you right now." "What if the judge says I have to go back?" "Then we'll figure it out together. But right now, the judge is looking at everything that's happened and trying to decide what's best for you. And what's best for you is staying somewhere safe where people are happy to take care of you." Wednesday brought my mother's reaction to Jessica's arrest, delivered through a phone call that alternated between sobbing and rage. "This is all your fault," she accused through tears. "If you hadn't filed that custody petition, none of this would have happened. Jessica wouldn't be in jail, and our family wouldn't be destroyed." "Mom, Jessica is in jail because she was selling drugs from a house where her 8-year-old son was living. That has nothing to do with my custody filing. She only started selling because she needed money after you froze that bank account. You pushed her into this." The accusation was so fundamentally twisted that I almost couldn't respond. My mother was suggesting that protecting joint inheritance money from theft had somehow forced Jessica into drug dealing. Jessica made her own choices, and those choices put Ethan in danger. I'm not responsible for the consequences of her decisions. "You always thought you were better than her, more responsible, more mature. Now you're using her mistakes to steal her son." "I'm not stealing anyone. I'm protecting a child who was abandoned and endangered by his mother's choices." The conversation ended with my mother hanging up on me, but not before making it clear that she blamed me entirely for the family's destruction and would never forgive me for turning everyone against Jessica. Thursday brought David Walsh's assessment of how Jessica's arrest would affect our custody case. Honestly, it makes our position nearly unassailable. Drug trafficking from a home with a minor child is about as serious as family court judges get.
Even if Jessica eventually resolves her criminal charges, the court will require extensive rehabilitation and monitoring before considering any custody return. What does that mean practically? It means you're looking at permanent custody unless Jessica can demonstrate sustained sobriety, stable housing, legal employment, and successful completion of parenting programs over a period of at least 2 years. And that's assuming she avoids significant prison time on the trafficking charges. That evening, while helping Ethan with homework, I marveled at how normal our routine had become. He did his math problems at the kitchen table while I prepared dinner, chatting about his day and asking questions about fractions. The contrast between this peaceful domestic scene and the chaos of drug houses, custody battles, and family destruction was stark. Aunt Rachel, I know Mom is in big trouble, but I'm not sad about staying here. Does that make me a bad son? Oh, sweetheart, that makes you a smart child who recognizes when he's safe and cared for. Loving your mom and feeling secure with me aren't opposites. They're both okay to feel at the same time. I do love Mom, but I like how quiet and safe it is here, and I like how you never seem mad that I need things. That simple statement encapsulated everything wrong with Ethan's previous living situation and everything right about his current one. Children should never feel like burdens for having basic needs, and the fact that he'd learned to expect irritation for asking for food, help, or attention spoke volumes about the environment Jessica had created. Friday morning brought news that would close one chapter of our story while opening another. Jessica had accepted a plea deal that would result in 18 months in prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation. In exchange, she would surrender all parental rights to avoid additional charges that could have resulted in a much longer sentence. She's essentially choosing reduced prison time over maintaining her relationship with Ethan, David Walsh explained. It tells us something about her priorities. The courtroom decision. The courtroom felt smaller than I'd expected, with fluorescent lighting that cast everything in harsh relief and wooden benches that had absorbed decades of family trauma. Judge Patricia Monroe was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing as she reviewed the thick folder of evidence that would determine Ethan's future.
Table are documentation organized in neat stacks that told the story of neglect, abandonment, and ultimate criminal behavior. Across the aisle, Jessica's court-appointed attorney looked resigned, shuffling through papers for a case that had become undefensible overnight. My father sat in the gallery behind us, his presence a quiet but powerful statement about where his loyalties now lay. My mother was noticeably absent, unable to face the proceedings that would officially sever Jessica's parental rights and formalize my guardianship of Ethan. Your Honor, Judge Monroe began, I've reviewed all submitted evidence in the matter of Thompson versus Miller regarding custody of minor child Ethan Miller. Given Miss Miller's recent guilty plea to drug trafficking charges and her voluntary surrender of parental rights, these proceedings will focus on determining the permanent custody arrangement for the child. The formal language felt surreal when applied to our family's destruction and reconstruction. Legal terms like voluntary surrender couldn't capture the complexity of Jessica choosing reduced prison time over fighting for her son, or the relief I felt knowing that Ethan wouldn't be subjected to years of uncertainty while his mother cycled through rehabilitation attempts. Jennifer Blake was called first to present her findings from the Child Protective Services investigation. Her testimony was clinical and thorough, describing the conditions in Jessica's home, the evidence of drug activity, and the clear signs of chronic neglect in Ethan's physical and emotional state when he came into my care. In my professional opinion, she concluded, this child was living in an environment that posed immediate and ongoing threats to his safety, health, and development. The placement with Miss Thompson has resulted in marked improvements in all areas of the child's well-being. Dr. Martinez testified next about Ethan's medical condition when I'd brought him for examination, detailing the signs of malnutrition, chronic stress, and medical neglect that painted a picture of systematic failure to provide basic care. Children who experience this level of neglect often suffer lasting effects on their physical and emotional development, she explained to the judge. However, Ethan has shown remarkable resilience, and his improved health indicators suggest he's responding well to consistent, appropriate care.
Miss Williams from Riverside Elementary provided testimony about the school's concerns and attempts to contact Jessica, as well as the dramatic positive changes in Ethan's academic performance and social engagement since staying with me. Ethan has transformed from a withdrawn, anxious child who frequently fell asleep in class to an engaged student who participates actively in lessons and plays normally with his peers, she told the court. The change has been remarkable and speaks to the stability of his current placement. When my father was called to testify, I could see the emotional cost of his decision to speak against Jessica. His voice was steady but strained as he described his visit to Jessica's house and the conditions he'd found there. I've spent years making excuses for my daughter's behavior because I wanted to believe she could change, he said, looking directly at Judge Monroe. But I can't make excuses for exposing my grandson to drug dealers and letting him live in squalor while I pretended everything was fine. Ethan deserves better than adults who choose their own comfort over his safety. The most difficult moment came when Judge Monroe asked to speak with Ethan privately in her chambers. I watched him walk away with the court bailiff, this small boy who had already endured so much adult drama and decision-making and felt the weight of everything that had led us to this moment. 20 minutes later, Ethan emerged from the judge's chambers looking thoughtful, but not distressed. He gave me a small smile before returning to sit with my father in the gallery, and I took that as a positive sign. Based on the evidence presented and my conversation with the minor child, Judge Monroe announced, I find that Ms. Thompson has demonstrated her ability to provide appropriate care and that continuation of this placement serves the child's best interests. Permanent legal guardianship is granted to Rachel Thompson with all rights and responsibilities that entails. The gavel's sound was anticlimactic after months of buildup, but the relief that flooded through me was profound. Ethan was officially mine to protect and raise with legal backing for every decision I'd need to make about his education, medical care, and future. After the hearing, David Walsh walked me through the practical implications of guardianship, while Ethan played in the courthouse waiting area with a puzzle book my father had brought. You now have full legal authority to make decisions about Ethan's care, including medical treatment, educational choices, and even things like getting him a passport if you want to travel. Jessica's rights have been terminated, so she has no legal standing to challenge your decisions or seek visitation. What happens when she gets out of prison? She could petition the court for contact, but she'd have to demonstrate compelling reasons why it would be in Ethan's best interests. Given the circumstances of her rights termination, that's an extremely high bar to meet. That evening, we celebrated quietly at home with takeout from Ethan's favorite Thai restaurant and a cake I'd picked up from the bakery. The significance of the day seemed to weigh on him as much as it did on me. "So I get to stay here forever?" he asked while we were cleaning up dinner dishes. "As long as you want to, and as long as it's what's best for you, yes. You're my responsibility now, which means I'm committed to taking care of you and helping you grow up safe and happy." "What do I call you now? Are you my mom or still my aunt?" It was a question I'd been wondering about myself. "What feels right to you?" He considered this seriously. "I think... Could I call you Mom Rachel? Like you're my mom now, but you're still Aunt Rachel too?" "That sounds perfect to me." #rebuilding and growing. The months following the custody hearing brought a new rhythm to our lives that felt both foreign and completely natural. Ethan threw himself into the security of routine with the enthusiasm of a child who had rarely experienced consistency. We established patterns around homework time, chores, weekend activities, and bedtime rituals that created the scaffolding of normal childhood. His academic progress was remarkable. Within 6 months, he'd caught up to grade level in all subjects and was excelling in areas where his natural curiosity could flourish. The anxious, hypervigilant child who had arrived at my door was gradually replaced by someone who felt safe enough to take intellectual risks and make mistakes without fear of adult disapproval. The transformation wasn't without its challenges.
Ethan struggled with what his therapist, Dr. Rebecca Morgan, called chronic vigilance, the learned behavior of constantly monitoring adult moods and needs that had been necessary for survival in Jessica's chaotic household. Children who grow up with unpredictable caregivers often become hyper-attuned to adult emotional states,
Dr. Morgan explained during one of our family sessions. Ethan learned to read danger signals and adapt his behavior accordingly. Learning to trust that he doesn't need to manage adult emotions is a process. We worked together on helping Ethan understand that children weren't responsible for adult feelings or problems, and that his needs and preferences mattered independently of their impact on my mood or convenience. It was harder than I'd expected to convince him that asking for help with homework, requesting his favorite foods, or expressing disappointment about plans wouldn't result in adult anger or withdrawal. The extended family situation remained complicated and painful. My father had maintained his support for our custody arrangement, visiting regularly, and developing a genuine relationship with Ethan that was based on the child's actual interests rather than abstract notions of family loyalty. He'd also begun attending therapy to work through his guilt about enabling Jessica's behavior for so many years. My mother, however, remained estranged from both Ethan and me. She'd sent a birthday card for Ethan's 9th birthday, but had made no effort to visit or rebuild a relationship. The card contained a note saying she hoped someday I'd understand the damage I'd done to our family, making it clear that she still viewed Jessica as the victim rather than Ethan. "It's her loss," my father said during one of his visits, watching Ethan demonstrate his improved soccer skills in the backyard. "She's missing out on knowing this incredible kid because she's stuck in her version of what the family should look like instead of accepting what it actually is." The most unexpected challenge came from my own adjustment to sudden parenthood. I'd spent months focused on protecting Ethan from immediate danger, but the daily reality of raising a child brought responsibilities and decisions I hadn't fully anticipated. Questions about allowances, screen time limits, friend selections, and activity choices required constant calibration between my natural tendency toward caution and Ethan's need for age-appropriate independence. I found myself second-guessing decisions that felt obvious in theory, but complex in practice. "You're overthinking it," Dr. Morgan told me during a solo session when I confessed my anxiety about making parenting mistakes. "Ethan has already experienced the worst-case scenario of adult failure. What he needs now isn't perfect parenting, it's consistent, caring parenting. Your willingness to question your choices and prioritize his well-being puts you ahead of many biological parents." 6 months after the custody hearing, Ethan asked about visiting Jessica in prison. The request caught me off guard, and I spent several days consulting with Dr. Morgan and David Walsh about the implications. "It's natural for him to be curious about his mother and to want closure," Dr. Morgan explained. "However, any contact should be carefully planned and supported with therapy both before and after." We decided that Ethan would write a letter first, with Dr. Morgan's help, to process his feelings and determine what he wanted to communicate. The letter he eventually produced was heartbreaking in its maturity and grace. "Dear Mom," it read, "I hope you are okay and getting help with your problems. I want you to know that I'm safe and happy with Mom Rachel. I have my own room and lots of food, and I'm doing good in school. I still love you, but I understand why I can't live with you anymore. I hope someday you can get better and we can see each other again. Love, Ethan." Jessica's response, which came 3 weeks later, was both heartening and concerning. She expressed remorse for her choices and pride in Ethan's progress, but also included requests for him to write more often and hints that she might seek contact when she was released. The undertones suggested she still didn't fully grasp the permanence of her rights termination or the extent of damage her behavior had caused. As Ethan's first Christmas with me approached, I found myself wanting to create traditions that honored his past while establishing new foundations for our future. We looked through photo albums from his early childhood, preserving memories of times when Jessica had been a more present mother, while also starting new customs that reflected our current family structure. "Can we get a real Christmas tree this year?" Ethan asked while we were planning holiday activities. "Mom usually got the fake one from the garage, but it was missing lots of branches and smelled weird." We spent a Saturday at a tree farm, tramping through rows of evergreens until Ethan found the perfect Douglas fir that we decorated with a mixture of ornaments I'd collected over the years and new ones we chose together. The tree became a symbol of growth and renewal that felt appropriate for our evolving family. Christmas morning brought the joy of watching Ethan experience abundance without anxiety. Previous holidays had apparently been sources of stress, with Jessica making promises about gifts that often didn't materialize or creating drama that overshadowed celebration. This Christmas, he was able to simply enjoy being a child, receiving thoughtful presents from an adult who was happy to provide them. "This is the best Christmas ever," he said while playing with his new art supplies, and I believed him not because of the presents, but because of the peace that surrounded our celebration. New challenges and growth. As Ethan's 10th birthday approached, marking nearly 18 months since he'd come to live with me, we faced new challenges that came with his increasing confidence and security. The anxious, hyper-vigilant child had been replaced by someone who felt safe enough to test boundaries and express normal childhood defiance. "I don't want to clean my room," he announced one Saturday morning with the kind of straightforward rebellion that would have been unthinkable during his early months with me. "It's my room and I like it messy." In any other context, this would have been standard parent-child negotiation. But for Ethan, the ability to express preferences that might displease an adult represented significant emotional growth. Dr. Morgan had prepared me for this phase, explaining that children who had been parentified needed to experience normal childhood pushback as part of their healing process. "You're right that it's your room," I replied, suppressing my own need for order, "but you still need to keep it clean enough to be healthy and safe. How about we figure out a compromise?" We negotiated a common setting system where he could keep certain areas of his room organized according to his preferences while maintaining basic cleanliness standards for shared spaces. The conversation itself was more important than its outcome. Ethan was learning that he could disagree with me without risking his security or my affection. School brought its own set of adjustments as Ethan's social confidence grew. Miss Williams, now his 5th grade teacher after moving up with her class, reported that he was becoming more assertive with peers and occasionally needed guidance about appropriate ways to handle conflicts. "He's gone from being almost invisible to sometimes being a little too forceful," she explained during a parent conference. "It's actually a positive development. He's experimenting with normal social dynamics instead of constantly trying to avoid attention." The most significant challenge came when Ethan expressed interest in joining the school's competitive soccer team, which would require travel to tournaments and overnight trips with other families. My protective instincts warred with my recognition that he needed age-appropriate independence and social opportunities. "What if something happens and I'm not there?" I confessed to Dr. Morgan during one of our sessions. "What specific something are you worried about?" she asked gently. When I couldn't articulate a realistic concern beyond vague fears of losing him, she helped me recognize that my anxiety was rooted in the trauma of how he'd come into my care, rather than actual risks associated with normal childhood activities. "Ethan needs to know that you trust him to handle age-appropriate challenges and that you believe in his ability to navigate the world safely," she explained. "Overprotection can become another form of limiting his development." We compromised by starting with day tournaments close to home before gradually working up to overnight trips. Watching Ethan's pride when his team won their first regional competition was worth every moment of anxiety I'd experienced about letting him go. As Jessica's release date approached, she'd served 14 months and would be eligible for early release with good behavior. We had to address the possibility of contact requests and how to handle them. David Walsh advised that while Jessica couldn't legally demand visitation, she could petition the court if she demonstrated rehabilitation and stability. "What do you want to happen if Mom asks to see me?" Ethan asked during one of our family discussions about the situation. "What do you want to happen?" I replied, knowing his answer would guide any decisions we made. "I think maybe somebody I'd like to see her, but not to live with her. And maybe not until I'm older and can understand better if she's really changed or just pretending." His insight impressed me once again. At 10 years old, he had a sophisticated understanding of the difference between genuine change and performative rehabilitation. We agreed that any future contact would be his choice, made when he felt ready, and would include therapeutic support regardless of timing. The second anniversary of gaining custody brought unexpected perspective on how far we'd both traveled. I was no longer the overwhelmed single woman trying to navigate sudden parenthood while fighting legal battles. Ethan was no longer the anxious child who apologized for existing and rationed food out of learned scarcity. "Remember when you used to ask if you could stay here?" I said one evening while we were making dinner together, a routine that had become one of our favorite times to talk. "I remember being scared you'd change your mind," he replied, stirring the pasta sauce with the confidence of someone who now took his security for granted. "I used to practice being really good so you wouldn't get tired of me. And now? Now I know you're not going to change your mind even when I mess up or forget to do chores or get grumpy about stuff." That simple statement encapsulated the most important achievement of our journey together. Ethan had learned to trust that love and security weren't contingent on perfect behavior or minimal needs. As spring arrived with its promise of renewal and growth, I found myself planning for Ethan's long-term future in ways that once seemed impossible. We discussed middle school options, summer camp possibilities, and even the college fund I'd started building for his eventual higher education. "Do you think you'll ever get married again?" he asked one day while we were planting tomatoes in our expanded garden. The question surprised me, partly because it hadn't occurred to me that my romantic future was something he thought about. "I don't know. Would that worry you?" "Not worry, exactly, but I'd want to make sure they were nice to both of us and didn't try to change how we do things." His protective instincts toward our family unit touched me deeply. This child who had experienced adult abandonment was now invested in protecting what we'd built together. "If I ever decided to date someone seriously, you'd definitely be part of those conversations. This is our family, and any changes would be something we decided together." Coming full circle. 3 years after that midnight phone call that changed everything, I stood in the kitchen of our home, truly our home now, with Ethan's artwork on the refrigerator and his soccer cleats by the back door, preparing for his elementary school graduation ceremony. The confident fifth grader getting ready upstairs bore little resemblance to the frightened 8-year-old who had once rationed crackers and apologized for being hungry. The morning brought an unexpected letter that would test how far we'd both come. Jessica had been released from prison 6 months earlier and had been working to rebuild her life in a residential treatment facility 3 hours away. Her letter, forwarded through David Walsh's office, was a request to attend Ethan's graduation ceremony. "I know I don't have the right to be there, but I would like the chance to see how well he's doing and to let him know that I'm proud of him, even though I can't take credit for the person he's becoming." The letter was more self-aware than previous communications, acknowledging her limited rights while expressing genuine interest in Ethan's well-being rather than her own needs. Ethan read the letter carefully, his face serious as he processed this unexpected contact from the mother who had been absent from his life for so long. "What do you think?" I asked, knowing that the decision would ultimately be his. "I think maybe it would be okay if she came, but not like she was my mom there. Just like someone who used to know me and wants to see how I'd turned out." His emotional maturity continued to amaze me. At 11 years old, he had a sophisticated understanding of the difference between genuine change and performative rehabilitation. We agreed that any future contact would be his choice, made when he felt ready, and would include therapeutic support regardless of timing. Care about him without being entitled to claim credit for his success. We agreed that Jessica could attend the public ceremony, but wouldn't participate in family photos or the celebration dinner we'd planned with my father and a few close friends. Dr. Morgan helped us prepare for the encounter, discussing how to handle whatever emotions might arise from seeing Jessica again after so long. The graduation ceremony was held in the school gymnasium, decorated with balloons and banners celebrating the achievements of 37 fifth graders preparing to transition to middle school. Ethan was receiving the Academic Achievement Award for Most Improved Student, recognition that felt particularly meaningful given where he'd started. I spotted Jessica before the ceremony began, sitting alone in the back row and looking smaller and older than I remembered. Prison and treatment had changed her appearance. The designer clothes and carefully maintained image had been replaced by simple, practical clothing and an expression of genuine humility I'd rarely seen from her. When Ethan's name was called for his award, Jessica applauded along with everyone else, but I noticed her wiping away tears as he walked across the stage with confidence and pride. After the ceremony, she approached us cautiously, as if unsure of her welcome. Congratulations, Ethan, she said quietly. You look so grown up and happy. I'm really proud of you. Thank you, he replied politely, but without the emotional intensity I might have expected from such a significant reunion. I won't keep you from your celebrations, Jessica continued, addressing both of us. I just wanted to say that I'm grateful he's had such good care and that I'm working hard to become someone worthy of knowing him again someday. The interaction lasted less than 5 minutes, but it provided closure that none of us had realized we needed. Jessica was demonstrating genuine change rather than demanding recognition for it, and Ethan was able to see her as a flawed person trying to improve rather than the source of danger he'd once fled from. How do you feel? I asked Ethan as we drove home after the celebration dinner. Weird, but okay weird, he said thoughtfully. Like, she seemed different, but I didn't feel scared or sad, just kind of nothing special. Is that mean? It's not mean at all. It's healthy. You've built a life that doesn't revolve around her presence or absence. That summer brought new adventures and challenges as Ethan prepared for middle school. We visited colleges during a road trip to give him a sense of future possibilities, spent a week at summer camp where he thrived in the independence, and completed a family project of documenting our story for a scrapbook that would help him remember both how far he'd come and the people who had supported his journey. "Why did you decide to fight for me?" he asked one evening while we were working on the scrapbook together. It was a question that went to the heart of everything that had happened to us. Because you deserved better than what you were getting, and I had the ability to provide it. Sometimes the most important decisions aren't really choices. They're just recognizing what needs to be done and being willing to do it. Even though it made other people in our family mad, protecting you was more important than keeping everyone else comfortable. That's what adults are supposed to do for children, prioritize their safety and well-being over everything else. As we prepared for his first day of middle school, I marveled at the transformation that had occurred not just in Ethan, but in myself. The overwhelmed, grieving widow who had answered that midnight phone call 3 years earlier had evolved into someone confident in her parenting abilities and secure in the family she'd fought to create. Ethan was no longer the abandoned child who had called asking for help. He was a confident preteen with opinions, friendships, academic interests, and plans for his future that extended far beyond basic survival. The hypervigilance had been replaced by normal childhood concerns about fitting in, academic performance, and social dynamics. "Are you nervous about middle school?" I asked while we were shopping for supplies. "A little, but excited nervous, not scared nervous. I know if anything goes wrong, you'll help me figure it out." That simple statement of trust represented everything we had accomplished together. Ethan had learned that adults could be reliable, that his needs mattered, and that asking for help was a sign of wisdom rather than weakness. The night before his first day of middle school, as I was tucking him in for what would probably be one of the last times he'd tolerate such parental attention, Ethan looked up at me with the serious expression he wore when processing important thoughts. "Mom, Rachel," he said, using the name that had evolved naturally over our years together, "I know my story started out sad and scary, but I'm glad it ended up with us being a family." "Me too, sweetheart, me too." As I turned off his light and headed downstairs to prepare for another day of the life we'd built together, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment of quiet contentment. We hadn't chosen each other in the traditional ways families are formed, but we'd chosen to fight for each other when it mattered most. The midnight phone call that had disrupted my carefully ordered life had led to challenges I never imagined facing.
And rewards I'd never thought to hope for. In saving Ethan from neglect and abandonment, I'd discovered parts of myself I'd never known existed. In learning to trust that he was truly safe and loved, he'd grown into someone capable of facing whatever challenges lay ahead. Our story wasn't traditional, but it was ours. Built on choice rather than obligation. Sustained by commitment rather than convenience. and strengthened by the knowledge that we'd both been willing to fight for what mattered most when fighting became necessary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Ethan navigated the complexities of adolescence, and I continued learning how to parent a child whose early experiences had been so different from typical childhood. But tonight, listening to his peaceful breathing through the baby monitor I still kept on my nightstand, I felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that he was truly home. Sometimes families are born from love at first sight. Sometimes they're forged in the crucible of crisis and sustained by the determination to protect what matters most. Our family belonged to the second category, and that made it no less real, no less valuable, and no less worth fighting for than any other. The phone that had once brought desperate calls for help now rang with invitations to playdates and calls from teachers sharing academic achievements. The house that had once felt too quiet now buzzed with the comfortable chaos of childhood. The future that had once seemed uncertain now stretched ahead with the promise of graduations, driver's licenses, college applications, and all the ordinary milestones that make up a life lived in safety and love. As I settled into my own bed, I whispered a thank you to whatever forces had made me answer that midnight call 3 years ago. In choosing to respond to one child's cry for help, I'd found my way to a purpose and a love that had transformed both our lives completely. The story that had begun with abandonment and fear had become one of protection and family, proving that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that choose each other when choosing becomes necessary. And in our choosing, we'd both found exactly what we'd needed to become who we were meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.